Welcome to Coffee with Phil. I'm your host, Phil Strong, and welcome to this new season, this new series called Let Your Light Shine. This series is based on the words of Jesus that we find in Matthew chapter 5. He says, "Let your light shine before all men." In this season, I'm going to tell stories about how I've used my life, my passion to serve others, to demonstrate the light of Jesus in many, many different ways. It's a story-based season, and I hope you get on board to understand how you can let your light shine. Well, hi and welcome to the podcast. Welcome to Coffee with Phil. And I, of course, am your host, Phil, and I'm in my office having a jolly good time. Well, actually, not really. A friend rang me today, "How you going?" And I said, "I'm actually having a pretty stink week." And feels like Friday, but it's only Tuesday. So, look, that's just how some weeks go. You have your challenges, and you just got to deal with them. But I would say this, look, this is just totally an aside here before I get into today, but one of the things that I learned was how David strengthened himself in the Lord. And so this morning, I didn't sleep much last night. I was awake by 6, which I don't enjoy, but just had to get up and spend time with the Lord. And I knew that it says in 1 Samuel 30, I think it's around verse 6, that David strengthened himself in the Lord. And so I've been training myself to do that over the years. And actually, in fact, a lot of that training was the genesis for the book Stay Strong that I released recently. And I apologize for the horrible segue into an advertisement. It wasn't what I intended, but I suppose I'm reminding myself just the importance of the discipline of learning to strengthen ourselves in the Lord, because you will have crappy days, as I've had. And so, look, that's a woe is me moment. Let's get talking about coffee, because that's going to cheer everybody up. So, welcome to Coffee with Phil. I reckon that's the first time I've ever done that in an introduction. So, you're welcome. But today in the introduction, I have an announcement to make. Oh my Lord, how exciting is this to be able to tell you there is even more new growth on my coffee plant. Yes, just down the corridor in my library, glimpsing around the corner towards the morning sun is a large pot with a coffee tree in it that's now about 4 foot high. A variety of colours, because it does struggle in the spot that it's in. It does get, let's just say, differing levels of attention from myself. But my son and I were looking at it on the weekend, and we were quite excited to see a couple of new shoots coming. Look, I'm not sure what that's going to do. Apparently, you've got to have a coffee tree about 4 years before you're even going to see a berry. And look, what's the chance that I could have a harvest maybe next year, and maybe 3 or 4 beans to insert into my mouth to extract the coffee, because I won't have enough beans to grind for a cup of coffee, that's for sure. Hey, but look, the reason I wanted to share that with you is A, it's exciting, but B, I wanted to say to you, I wanted to prophesy to you, anticipate new things. I want you to anticipate new things. And even in the middle of the series that we're in, Let Your Light Shine, looking at where we're heading in this episode, God is saying to you and to me, anticipate new things. Now, in the introduction, what I want to say to you, perhaps I could pose it this way. Let me ask you 3 questions. Are you growing? Are you extending? And are you preparing for fruit? So I'm actually asking you, are you like my coffee tree? Are you growing? Is there new shoots coming up? Are you extending to find the sunlight? And are you preparing to bear fruit? Those are actually challenging questions. And hopefully what I'm going to do today is to prepare you to consider those questions. So friends, don't just jump off the podcast and jump into the next motorsport or the rugby debrief or some other podcast that you've got lined up in your playlist. Stop and think about it. Come on, let's be really seeking God's heart in the season as we anticipate new things. I would like to refer you back to the series that I did earlier in this calendar year. I've written it down for you so you can find it. The series on promotion, episodes beginning at 110 and heading through to 118. That's a series on promotion, and you will get a lot out of that series, because if you're going to anticipate new things, it's about readiness, and it's about readiness for what God is doing. And look, even in my wrestling overnight, as I tossed and turned and I had a lot on my mind, as I lay there in the dark this morning, sort of avoiding getting up, but knew that I needed to spend time with the Lord. Even in that space, I felt the Lord say, in this season, I am even preparing you. And so you've got to understand that when the Lord works in seasons, because that's how he does with us, that I said to a guy last night I was spending time with, I said to him, look, even in this time, we can say, what good is the Lord going to do? What good is the Lord going to generate out of this season? So the Lord is doing things. So go and check out the series on promotion, anticipate new things, and let's get into Coffee with Phil episode 131. The title of this episode, near the end of the series, Let Your Light Shine. Let Your Light Shine. This episode 131, is called You Do You. You Do You. And I'm going to get into that in a minute. Before I do, I made a commitment that I would remind you in this series each time why we are talking about Let Your Light Shine. And the whole series comes from Matthew chapter 5, verse 16, the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus speaks to those who would listen, and he says, let your light shine before all men, that they would see your good deeds, your great works, and glorify your Father in heaven. Sorry, I had a little bit of a hiccup there. That your life would bring glory to God. And there's three things here. One, we're meant to shine. Two, our shining is meant to affect others. And three, we are supposed to have lives that point to the Father. So let your light shine, friends, before all men, that they would see your good deeds, your great works. And so today I want to say to you that you need to do you. You do you. You be you. Don't try and be me. Don't try and be someone that you aspire to. Be the best version of you. And I want to talk about that in 1, 2, 3 parts. And a little bit of an anecdote in the middle there. So let's get into this. First thing I would say to you is, as I prepare to say this, I'm like, this just sounds so ridiculous. It's so obvious. When I say you do you, the first point I make is it's personal. Like, you can see why I'm laughing at myself here. But what I mean by that, come on, let's get serious. What I mean by that is the focus and the responsibility is personal. The focus and the responsibility that you've got to embrace is that God made you to be you, designed you to be the only you, for a purpose. Ephesians 2 verse 10, for we are God's masterpiece, each one of us, created anew in Christ Jesus for the good works that God has prepared in advance for us to do. You let your light shine, to do those good works, to represent the painter, the artist that created the masterpiece that is you, and you've got to take the responsibility of that. And I would say this, if not you, then who? And you know, like Kathy and I have this language that we use. We were talking about something the other day, and I said to her, look, I see the concern. I recognize that it is a concern, but I also want to acknowledge that it's not my assignment. And, you know, you've got to be careful there that you just don't abdicate yourself from any responsibility, but I'm sure that I've got enough. The point I'm making is not every assignment is my assignment. Not every mountain is for me to climb. Not every person's problem becomes my problem. But I do need to stop and say, if not me, then who? So if not you, then who? And what I'm really preferring to do here in this moment is to think about the personal nature of your assignment, the focus you are supposed to have, and the responsibility that you are supposed to carry so that you do you. And I've got a contrast here, a biblical contrast, well known to you, I am sure, if you've had the Bible open at any time in your life, towards the end, you would have read the writings of a man called Paul, the Apostle Paul. Paul, who was Saul of Tarsus, had a radical, life-altering encounter, went from killing Jews to being a servant of Jesus, and had this radical transformation, went on 3 missionary trips that we know of, was imprisoned in Rome, appealed to Caesar, and then was killed. Happy days, not a good end to the story, except that he wrote, like a significant portion of the New Testament, his revelation, his teaching, and his writing to the churches and to us is foundational in how the modern church is established and how it conducts itself. So the Apostle Paul, a significant figure, you could say, in the story of the church. Apostle Paul, you know who he is. You know who he is. But did you know he had a couple of friends? Aquila and Priscilla. Aquila and Priscilla, they're married, they're a couple, they are tent makers. Paul found them because they were making tents, and he himself was trained as a tent maker, and he had a motivation to work for his living, basically. He said, I do not want to be a burden on you, and so I work with my hands. But what I want you to know about Aquila and Priscilla is that they're very, very different to Paul. So they're friends of Paul. They hosted Paul. He lived with them in their home. They did business together. But I want you to see that they were very, very different. So you do you, and don't worry about doing someone else. The Apostle Paul was out there, man. He was aggressive. He was trained in the law. He was probably got that kind of tenacious personality where he would go in for a fight willingly because he had the narrative ability to stand toe-to-toe and argue to defend the gospel message of Jesus Christ. And we see that several times in the Greek culture of his day as he traveled Thessalonica, he traveled through Philippi, went down to Corinth. He's having these debates with the scholars of the day. Mars Hill, he's having an argument, and he's using local culture to astound them in their own stupidity because, he's suddenly saying, look, these things you worship, he says, I can point you to the God who created them. So that's Paul, and he went on donkey, he went on boat, he went by walking, he was shipwrecked, I think, 3 times, he was whipped and beaten and left for dead, he'd been hungry, he'd gone without, and he did all of this because he was passionately committed to his assignment to spread the gospel of Jesus across the known civilized world of his time. Very, very different to Priscilla and Aquila, or as I called them, Aquila and Priscilla. Priscilla being the wife, Aquila being the husband. Interestingly, a side note, Priscilla is referred to first, primarily, in the order that Paul writes it, indicating that she was the strong one, the leader of the couple. But what I want you to note is that they were very relational. They were great at hosting people. They were great at the quiet kind of discipleship that was necessary, but didn't need a stage, didn't need a platform. They were not interested in getting on the boat with Paul and traveling to every single place that he went to because he was passionate about speaking life and truth into the churches and the believers, the gatherings that he'd established. Priscilla and Aquila were happy to toddle along in the quiet and do their thing. They were great at the relational kind of work. They were influential in the life of young Timothy. And there's another story that I want to point you to. So let's just have a look at this, because I just want to give you the context of what I'm saying here to give you some understanding. For those of you that like to read the Bible, you can read it in Acts chapter 18, starting at verse 18. So Acts 18, starting at verse 18. Paul stays in Corinth, and then he left his church family, the people that had gathered, and he sailed with Priscilla and Aquila. And he did that. They arrived at Ephesus. So they went across the Med to the east, and they landed in Ephesus. And they went from there and then down to Antioch. Okay, then they traveled. Now listen to this. At a time, a Jew named Apollos came to Ephesus. He was educated. He was from Africa, Alexandria. He knew the scriptures very, very well. Well, he was a Jew. He was raised in the Jewish church. Apollos had been taught the way of the Lord, meaning the Lord Jesus, and he spoke with great power. He spoke with truth about Jesus, but he only knew about John's baptism. And he came and he spoke boldly in the synagogue. Now, get this. Jew Apollos came to Ephesus, speaking in the synagogue in Ephesus, and Priscilla and Aquila heard him. Hang on, stop, pause, time out. These guys traveled with Paul from Corinth. They sailed across the sea and landed in Ephesus. Then Paul said goodbye to them, and he carried on. And he went off and did certain things in Caesarea and Jerusalem and Antioch. That's the point. Paul's traveling. He's carrying on. He's getting into it. He's like, I'm off and I'm doing it, right? And it's implied when you get later into the story that you see Priscilla and Aquila, well, they'd actually already stayed in Ephesus. And they're part of the church family, and they've got a responsibility in Ephesus to nurture the believers there. We know that Timothy was based there from the writings of Paul to Timothy. But listen, let me carry on, because I want to explain to you and show to you the responsibility that you have to do you is not to try and be me. You're not trying to be Paul. You're not trying to be the pastor down the road. You're not trying to be anyone else except yourself. And so look at this. In verse 26 of Acts chapter 18, we see Apollos began to speak boldly. In the synagogue, Priscilla and Aquila heard him, and they invited him to their home, and they gave him a better understanding of the way of God. Wow. Look at this. I'm contrasting to you on purpose the Apostle Paul, who's out there, he's building relationships, and he keeps on moving, spreading the church, reporting back to Jerusalem, establishing real significant spaces for the advancement of the gospel message of Jesus. But Priscilla and Aquila were in their home church. They heard Apollos. They knew that there was some correction that he needed, and so they invited him into their home. There, they gave him a better understanding of the way of God. Friends, the point is this. For you to do you, you've got to know who you are. Not everyone wants to stand in the limelight. Not everyone should. Not everyone wants to make cups of tea, and not everyone should. Not everyone needs to go on the mission field, and not everyone should. You know, if you can't bake cakes for your neighbors, why don't you go and mow their lawns? The point is, you do you. The second thing, this totally links us to the second point, is that it does require you to understand who you are. And I've said this for years, friends, self-mastery requires self-knowledge. You cannot become the most excellent version of yourself if you don't know who you are. So you've got to get into it. You've got to begin to understand yourself, your strengths and your weaknesses, the experiences that you carry that become a treasury of richness of God's working in your life for the purpose of the next season. But it's way, way more important than you realize. Self-reflection, self-analysis will lead to self-understanding. Self-understanding will take you along the journey towards self-mastery. Because if I'm going to say you do you, let your light shine before all men, you better know who you are. And, you know, I've often put myself in positions that are not helpful because I kind of know that I've got an understanding at least of who I am. I think I've made enough mistakes to have lessons along the way. And so when I find myself in a position that's not my strength, I'm like looking around me because I'm like, okay, God did not isolate me here. He did not set me up to look like an absolute knob. He's not trying to trick me up. So maybe he's trying to connect me. Maybe he wants me to help someone else to find an opportunity. Maybe I'm just here to open a door. Maybe I'm just here to be Barnabas, to be the encourager. Maybe I'm just here because I've got to be an enabler, in the shadows, turn the lights on or make the cups of tea, as it were. The point is, when you know who you are, you know who you're not. And that's a really important lesson. It's about setting boundaries, not just for safety, but, like when you spend all your effort doing the wrong thing, you don't do the right thing. So the question is, who am I made to be? And the answer, friends, is in that question. Who am I made to be? If I understand that I'm made to be someone, then I'm made by someone, which means there's a creator. So I'm not going to find out unless I ask the creator. How many people go on these self-help courses and they want to understand self-improvement? I'm like, shut up. You're not supposed to improve yourself. You're supposed to let God do it. He's the Father. He's the author of your life. He's the one that does the transformation of any significance. And that doesn't mean to say I don't bend myself to his process, but when I try and control the process, that's just called self-worship. That's called me being on the throne of my life. I'm going to do it my way, my timeline, and I'm going to be the boss. And, either Jesus is Lord of all or he's not Lord at all. So, self-mastery requires self-knowledge. It's way more important than you might realize. And so you need to go on the journey and say, who am I made to be? And the only way you're going to find that out is by making yourself submitted to the Creator who made you to be awesome and wants to show you how to be awesome and where to be awesome. And before I get to the crux of it, I want to just put a little shout out here. There's a message I listened to maybe 8-9 years ago by Pastor Bill Johnson, and there's one line in that sermon that I've never ever forgotten. I've preached it a couple of times, but I've shaped some of my life around this one quote. Bill Johnson said this in a sermon. He said, "The light that shines the farthest burns brightest at home." So think about that logically. If you've got a really, really bright spotlight, like you see on Batman. Or what about if it was actually like a big fire, like a bonfire? And we I remember once we did a Guy Fawkes bonfire in our paddock at one of the properties we own, big paddock out the front, and we got all the youth around, and me and the kids and a few of their friends, we made this massive kind of stuffed dummy, and we soaked the clothes in petrol and diesel, and we made all sorts of other decorations, and the bonfire was massive. And we invited the whole youth group around, and we had barbecue, and we had friends there, and there was absolutely no health and safety plan. One of the games we played was fireball football, and so what we did is we actually lit the soccer ball on fire, and we had a game of football in the paddock. So as you can tell, I had very little regard for safety. But anyway, no one was harmed in the making of the story. The point is, that bonfire was massive, and if you stood next to it, it was incredibly bright. But we did get reports from houses 5 kilometres away that said they could see the fire. What's the point? When it burns super bright at home, it shines a long way. The light that shines the furthest burns brightest at home. What's that? Just go somewhere. Stir up the fire and go somewhere, and you'll see the light shine. Oh, look, I'm looking at the time. I'm thinking, flip, I've got to finish this because there's the major point that I really felt to land on here. And I'm going to connect the beginning and the end. So let me go back to the beginning. I said to you, anticipate new things. The prophetic word of the Lord for you today is anticipate new things because the Lord is preparing you for something. Like my coffee plant with the new shoots. Lord's preparing you, He's preparing me. He's doing a deep work in us. I'm saying, are you growing? Are you extending? Are you preparing for fruitfulness? My final point, as I connect you to that thought, is this. This process will require internal prepare. Friends, I am encouraging you to let your light shine. I am exhorting you. Please do not be one of those Christians that hides their light under a bowl or doesn't have a light at all. Maybe you're just a little flicker. Maybe your light's gone out. Maybe your battery's flat. Look, get the battery recharged or buy some new ones. But listen to this. To let your light shine, it will require an internal repair. How can you do you if you're cracked? Think about a light bulb, old school now, not LED lights. Think about a light bulb. If the light bulb's cracked or if the filament's broken, it can't work. Internally, it's not functioning. How can you do you if internally you're not functioning? And I have been saying for several years to the church, not just my family, but that church, I've been saying God is coming to do a work of deliverance in the church. And we are not to be afraid. We are not to shy away. We are not to hide ourselves because the freedom that Jesus paid for, He wants you to walk in. And how can we invite people into a church that's broken or cracked or full of demons? What are we going to reproduce? Just more of the same. So how can you do you if you're cracked? And so the second part of that is how can you get the light turned up? If you're not cracked, if you're needing some work inside you, if you say, look, I've been through that, I've been through I podcasted last year and the year before a deep work that God was doing, coming out of burnout and self-revelation and understanding and doing a whole lot of internal healing. And so how do you turn the light up after that? And so as I finish here, I've just got this imagery of a fire. And if you've ever been camping or in the old days when I was a kid, one of my jobs after school in the winter was to make the fire in the lounge. We had an open fire and that was how we heated the living space in Mum and Dad's house. And often to get the fire going, you learn that if you blow on the embers, if you blow on the fire at the base of it, if you breathe on it, then the flames get turned up. The fire is stoked, as it were. And if you've ever been outside with a massive bonfire like what I was talking about, you know which way the wind's blowing, A, because you know where the smoke is, but B, you can see the flames respond. And I've just got this imagery as we finish here. And I want you to, don't close your eyes if you're driving, but certainly close your eyes if you can. I just want you to have this visual image of the fire of God burning inside you. Friends, if you confess Jesus as your Lord and Savior, you have a deposit of the Holy Spirit, the fire of God. And I'm saying to you that the breath of God is blowing on that fire right now. And I want you to imagine it, just whether it's a small burning ember flickering away inside you, whether there's already a fire there. I'm saying the Lord is blowing on that. I want you to imagine the breath of God, the wind of God, the ruach, the Spirit is blowing on the fire that's within you, that you will be forged into a place of strength because of the fire of God. And when you do that, the light burns brighter. And the light that burns brighter at home shines further. Friends, let your light shine before all men, that they would see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Well, the last thing that I have to do in this episode is ask you to think about what is the one thing that I'm going to commit to do as a result of listening to this podcast. What is the one thing? Come on. When you stop this shortly, you're going to think and say to yourself, who was I made to be? And what's one thing that I'm going to do so that I can be a better version of me? Well, God bless you, friends. May the wind of God go before you, behind you, and stoke up the fire within you. And may we have fun when we get back together next time. Until then, God bless, take care, and make sure you drink good coffee. Okay? God bless. Talk to you soon.